Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Tapscott. I just want to make sure with the tech support folks here that my screen is appearing, and it looks like it is, which is wonderful news. So thank you very much to Campus Party for hosting this event and for being innovative in the midst of a pandemic. It's wonderful to see the virtual event moving ahead and to see such inspiring and incredible speakers and to see such great engagement from the audience. To all of you who are watching this from home or from the office, or wherever you might be, let me at first extend my sincere thanks for joining today, and also my hopes that you are safe, healthy, and in the presence of family and loved ones. This is a very interesting time in human history for obvious reasons, and the pandemic is just one of many examples of that. What crises generally tend to do is accelerate the pace of human innovation and human history. Laws that would have taken months or years to clear Congress or Parliament, depending on where you are passed in a matter of days or even hours. Big trends in technology, like the pace of, say, e-commerce, can double or triple overnight, something we've seen. Concepts that were formerly taboo, modern monetary theory, for example, all of a sudden are becoming mainstream. And as a result of this, many businesses and organizations are going to be fundamentally transformed by that. And this time couldn't have come at a more tumultuous period in human history, because behind the scenes, we're actually going through one of the biggest transformations of technology in at least a generation. And this is often characterized as the second digital age. There are many new technologies that are part of this digital age, of course, the rise of augmented reality and virtual reality, self-driving and electric vehicles, machine learning and artificial intelligence. But there's one technology in particular that's having a greater impact than all of these and will help to animate the second digital age. And it might surprise you to learn that it's actually the technology that enables Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And this technology is called blockchain. It is our belief, and this is based on extensive research and the publication of multiple books on the subject, including Blockchain Revolution and Financial Services Revolution, the former having been translated into 19 languages, that blockchain represents nothing short of the second era of the internet and will make the transformations of the first era of the internet look like kid stuff. So let me explain what I mean by that. When you use the internet today to send and move and share information, you're not actually sending an original, unique thing. You're sending a copy and you're retaining an original. So if you think about email, if you send an email to some person, you can send the same email to someone else. If you tweet something, it's available for everyone to read. If you put something into Wikipedia, anybody can access that. And for most kinds of information, that's actually a really good thing. It's basically like we each have our own printing press for information. And that's done more than any technology to flatten the earth in the sense that we all have democratic access to much of the world's information. Except when it comes to things that have value, money and financial assets, being able to send a copy is actually a terrible idea. You see, if I owe you, someone on the other end of the screen, some money for something, it's important that when you receive it, that you have the only version of its kind. Let me just get to that slide again. And if I can send a copy of that money or a copy of any other asset, I don't know, a stock or someone's identity or the title to a piece of property like your home or your apartment, then that's a big problem. So it's great to have a printing press for information, not so great to have a printing press for money. And this is something that can actually be described by a computer science problem. It's called the double spend problem. How do you ensure that when you move something of value digitally, that the version that you send is the only one of its kind? How do you create digital scarcity when the internet is basically just a printing press for information? And the way in which we've solved this problem, and it's not all that different from how we've solved it through much of history, is through the use of trusted middlemen, intermediaries. Now, through history, most of those intermediaries were banks and governments and other large entities. Increasingly, they are big technology companies, digital conglomerates, the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Apples of the world, who, having conquered a lot of different parts of the information economy, are now setting their sights on the value economy. And overall, these intermediaries do a pretty good job. but they have some very specific limitations. They're centralized, so they're vulnerable to hacking or to attack. They slow things down and they add friction. They add cost to participants. So if you think of something like, say, sending money overseas, the average fees for remittances are 9%, according to the World Bank, which is funny. You know, we talk about the market for cross-border payments as if that's a real thing. But we never talk about the market for cross-border email, because email flows like water, right? You can send an email to someone, it doesn't cost you anything, and yet somehow when you send money to them, it costs 9% and can take many, many days. And the most troubling drawback of these middlemen is that they capture data. They capture all this information about us, which can be used to undermine our privacy. It certainly means we can't monetize it, and we know it's worth value. Just look at the market size of many of the biggest technology firms. They're in the trillions of dollars. That value is built on an empire of user data. So what if there was another way? What if the internet was entering, I don't know, a second era? And what if the revolutionary technology behind Bitcoin had something to do with it? So what a blockchain is basically a distributed ledger. So it is a record of all the transactions that have occurred. Except instead of sitting inside of one single computer system, like say at a bank or, I don't know, at a government bureaucracy, it exists on every device that's connected to the network. And anybody can send value peer-to-peer from one computer to another computer without the need for a trusted third-party intermediary. On a blockchain, consensus drives the network. So we get trust not from trusted third parties, but rather through consensus and some clever code. And the way it works basically is that every time a new transaction occurs, it's added to that ledger which everyone can see. And that ledger exists on every single computer connected to the network. So being able to hack it or reverse a transaction or override something becomes extremely difficult. Now, what's interesting about Bitcoin is that it actually worked. And it's worked so well that it's set off the spark which has caught on like wildfire and captured the imagination of people in many industries, most importantly in financial services. You see, the technology that makes it possible to move a Bitcoin from one person to another makes it possible to move virtually any asset in the world. Identities, stocks, bonds, titles, deeds, even votes in an election. You know, because a vote is like a payment. It's important when you vote that you can't vote twice, right? And that you can trust that the results are accurate. So what if every single asset in the economy could be digitized? Well, we'd be on the precipice of a completely new way of thinking about how we organize capability, how we do business, how we transact, how markets work. And as a result, there would be a huge and profound impact on every industry. The financial services industry today isn't a fast, efficient peer-to-peer network that runs digitally. It looks a lot more like this device, which is known as a Rube Goldberg machine. Now, a Rube Goldberg machine is a contraption that performs a bunch of very unnecessary and convoluted steps, and in the end, it solves a very simple simple problem, like it, closes a door or cracks an egg or something like that. This is basically the way our financial industry works today. So, you go to Starbucks and you buy a coffee and you have a card that allows you to tap the card reader, and you think, wow, this is a touch-free, instant digital payment. The financial industry is so advanced. What you don't see in the background is that the money is not moving from you to Starbucks. It is actually going through at least 5 or 6 different middlemen. Your bank, the merchant, in this case Starbucks Bank, credit card company, a payment processor, risk management firm, some kind of a payment network, Swift, ACH, etc. It's an alphabet soup. I won't get into it. But the point is that it takes forever for the money to actually reach the merchant. 3 days, even though the transaction seems instant. And it's not free and frictionless. It actually costs the merchant what's called an interchange, which can range from 1 to 10%. In financial services, let's say capital markets. In capital markets, they have these things called high-frequency traders, right? These people that measure competitive advantage in nanoseconds. But when it comes time to clear and settle those transactions, it's not clearing and settling in a fraction of a second. It's taking 3 days, and it's costing a lot of money to do that. So you can think of most innovation in financial markets today as more like digital wallpaper. And it's nice that it helps to make the appearance of the industry look a little bit cleaner. But underneath the surface, the underlying structure, the building itself, is in dire need of a renovation. The piping is bursting, the electrical wiring is fried. The infrastructure of the financial system today is older than I am and older probably than most of you are. The system that we use today for bank settlement in the United States was developed in the 1970s, for example. We don't need mainframe computers in Midtown Manhattan to move value around the world anymore. So what does this mean for you and for the world of financial services as we understand it? Well, on the far end, to the right here, you'll see decentralized finance, Bitcoin being the most obvious example. Bitcoin is a truly digitally native way to move value peer-to-peer without an intermediary. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the more traditional system where we have commercial banks, central banks, and payment networks like SWIFT that act as centralized intermediaries in moving value and establishing trust. Most of the innovation is going to happen somewhere in the middle. We're not going to throw out the whole financial system wholesale, but everyone who is in it is going to need to learn to adapt. The financial industry is a complicated beast. It's more than just any one industry. It's actually the lifeblood of global commerce. It is the way in which money moves around the world, in which transactions get settled and value of goods gets transported. But when you boil it down, basically, the financial industry does 9 essential things. And we call this the Golden 9. So I'm not going to go through every one in detail, but we should summarize them at the start. Identity. So who's the buyer and who's the seller? You know, do you know your customer? Have you done an identity check? You can't get a bank account unless you have an identity, and I think everyone here knows that. Storing value. You know, when you make more money than you spend, you save it somewhere, and that's true for companies and that's true for individuals. Moving value. How do you make payments? How do people make payroll? How do you move money to your college-age kid who's studying, or at least used to before the virus? Or how do you move money to your family living in their ancestral land if you're working in the United States, Canada, or somewhere else? Lending value. How do we get access to mortgages, car loans? How do governments borrow? Funding and investing. How do entrepreneurs get access to growth capital to grow a business? Exchanging value. How do we end up trading all of these things? We hear about, you know, stocks and bonds, and they're worth trillions of dollars. You know, we have to have some way of getting buyers and sellers connected with each other in common marketplaces. Insurance and managing of risk. This is a massive multi-trillion-dollar industry. The notional value of derivatives, which are meant to offset risks or hedge against risks, is in the hundreds of trillions of dollars. And analyzing value. This is bigger and more important now than ever before, thanks to the rise of big data. And accounting for value. How do we organize financial information? Okay, I know. Let's take a breath. It's a lot to digest, but let's just go through a couple in a little bit more detail. So identity. So banks have to do what's called KYC and AML, know your customer, and anti-money laundering compliance. Normally, the way this works is you've got a driver's license, a passport, a birth certificate, utility statement, proof of address, etc. You have to provide all of these attestations of who you are in order to get access to financial services. When you buy something online, you end up providing so much more information than what's really necessary. You know, if you have to buy something on the internet, does the merchant really need to know where you live and what your birth date is or any other information? I don't think so. I think the merchant only needs to know that you have the money. If you go to a local store, let's say you go to buy a carton of milk and you hand the clerk $5, he doesn't ask you for your driver's license, right? He doesn't ask you for your passport or your social insurance number. All that's required is that you have the money. The money is a bearer instrument. So when you pass it to him, he has it and you do not. What blockchain enables is for digital bearer instruments. Basically, what that means is that we can start to transact and do business without actually having to share as much information about ourselves, which is good for privacy and it's good for how we protect our data. But sometimes your identity is required in a transaction. Let's say you want to get a mortgage, for example. The bank needs to know that you're good credit, that you're going to make your payments, that you have sufficient income. The difference, though, is that instead of them going to a third-party provider like Equifax, it's up to you to provide informed consent because you control your information. And data ultimately is the most important asset of this digital economy. You know, in the olden days, land was the most important asset of the agrarian age, and feudalism was the dominant economic model. The industrial era came along, and all of a sudden industrial plant and equipment, railroads, steel mills, and so forth became the most important assets, and that's where many of the fortunes got built. Today, fortunes are being built on an empire of data. Now, they say that data is the new oil. I don't think that's accurate. Data is the new plant and equipment. Data is the machine itself that allows companies to unlock billions, if not trillions of dollars of value. The old way things worked was a form of digital feudalism, where you are a passive recipient of all of these different services. You share all your data with all of these different entities, your government, your Amazons, your bank, what have you. And in the end, you receive a small amount of value. And in the end, you end up compromising your privacy. A new way to think about this is what we call citizen-owned dynamic identity, whereby you as the individual control your data. And the example I gave about getting a loan, I think, illustrates that point. Moving value. So today, or I should say as of until recently, the way in which you moved money cross-border or between individuals was through companies, right, through banks. And yes, there have been some innovations on the margin, you know, companies like Venmo, which our US audience would be quite familiar with. But in the end, all you're doing with Venmo is moving money between two different bank accounts at the same bank controlled by Venmo, or rather that Venmo banks with. But now we can create native digital forms of money that allow us to move assets peer-to-peer. Stable coins are digital assets like Bitcoin, except instead of being volatile, they're pegged to some pre-described value. In this case, in most cases, I should say, the US dollar. And the value of stablecoins has increased from a few $100 million a couple of years ago to over $15 billion today, and is growing at an exponential rate every 6 months. And what stablecoins allow you to do is to move US dollars or other currencies peer-to-peer from your wallet to someone else's wallet in a matter of seconds with zero cost. So you think about all of the examples of which money needs to move across borders or between individuals and the fees associated with it, and you can understand why this is quite disruptive. And it's so disruptive that the biggest and most powerful stakeholders in the world are catching notice. Central banks, for example, are now beginning to create their own digital currencies. Mark Carney, the outgoing governor of the Bank of England, has been a big proponent of this. But the real innovation, at least today, is coming out of China. China's central bank digital currency has gone live in many different cities and is now being widely used. And it's incumbent on other countries to innovate at the same pace unless they want to see China gain a greater share of international trade. And big companies are also getting deeply involved in this. Facebook has an initiative called LIBRA, which is basically a stable coin that it will create and administer, though it won't govern per se. It's going to be governed by a consortia of different entities. And Facebook, as we know, has not been without controversy in the past. Facebook has faced some backlash for its practices with user data, and similarly, it's facing backlash for Libra. So whether or not Libra succeeds, and I think ultimately it will. The team there is incredibly bright and very dedicated. But whether or not Libra succeeds, it's only a matter of time before other big companies realize the value of not just controlling the innovation or the information economy, but being able to control the value economy, which is a much, 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 much bigger part of economic activity. You know, there are parts of the financial services industry, like insurance, for example, that are bigger than the entire media, publishing, and advertising business combined, right? Those are the kinds of industries that these companies are now targeting. Funding and investing. How do entrepreneurs get access to growth capital to scale their business? Well, the old way that it used to work was that you would do a seed financing round, and then Series A, and Series B, and a Series C, and a Series D, and then you would go bankrupt. No, well, unless you were WeWork. But normally what you do is you go public, right? You tap into this global or this bigger market where there's larger pools of capital, you raise money and you build your business, you continue along that path. And that's a system that's worked pretty well, but it has some limitations. There's lots of friction, there are lots of intermediaries in the mix. What blockchain enables is for companies to raise money from a global marketplace by issuing a digital asset which represents a share in their enterprise. Now, some of you may be familiar with this concept of an ICO, what's called initial coin offering. ICOs ultimately didn't really work out because it was not clear what the coin was. What did it represent? Was it something I could use inside of the app? Was it equity in the company? Nobody really understood. But what I think the future innovation is going to be is basically just like a digital crowd sale, where you're selling small slivers of your company to investors all around the world. And that's really important. You know, the value of the venture capital market in the US is $60 billion in size. And I think that it's only a matter of time before peer-to-peer funded token sales representing equity become the dominant model. Exchanging value. This is something that I think people need to understand a little bit better about digital assets. So not all crypto assets are coins or currencies. In fact, only a very select few are designed to be currencies in the traditional sense. A currency is designed to be a medium of exchange, a store of value, and a unit of account. So Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. Many other tokens are designed to be something else. One of the most interesting ones is called a security token. And I don't mean security like lock your doors. I mean security in the sense of a share of a company. So securities markets can encompass everything from stocks, so equities, to bonds, to futures and forwards, and everything else in between. So let's focus on just equities alone. The value of all global companies that are publicly listed is over $100 trillion in size. The way in which we transact in those assets, the way in which those trades clear and settle, the way in which we hold and custody those assets basically has not changed in 30 or 40 years. What securities tokens allow us to do is to trade anything, and this could be shares in Apple or shares in your local restaurant, in a manner that is peer-to-peer and frictionless. And that's going to have a profound impact not just on markets, but on all the companies that rely on them, big banks, stock exchanges, broker-dealers, and the like. The final one I'll talk about on this is accounting. Now, accounting can be boring, but in the case of blockchain, it's actually quite fascinating, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So most people don't realize this, but accounting as we know it today is an invention of the Italian Renaissance. There was a man named Luca Pacioli who was best friends with Leonardo da Vinci. He was a polymath, a mathematician. The man was a genius. And one of the mathematical principles that he defined in a book called Principia Mathematica was accounting, a thing called double entry bookkeeping. And the idea is quite simple. It means that every time there's a transaction, you record a debit and a credit. And in the end, the transaction has to balance, which is why we call it a balance sheet, something I know everyone here is familiar with. And that's really interesting. And it's a big innovation, and probably double entry bookkeeping more than anything, maybe other than indoor plumbing, is responsible for the modern world as we know it. But it hasn't really changed much in like 565 years. And so now we're on the brink of a new era where instead of just double entry bookkeeping, we can have triple entry bookkeeping. So recall from my original definition of blockchain, it is a distributed ledger. Everyone has access to a copy. Everyone can see all the transactions that have occurred. What that means in practical matter for accounting is that instead of a company having to record a debit and a credit on its books and having it be audited and having reporting it to a regulator and so forth, we can see in real time what individuals and businesses are doing. And we know that the results are accurate because they are recorded in a way that makes it almost impossible to tamper with. So all of a sudden, we have this new method of accounting, which is going to have a big impact on audit firms, on businesses, and on governments. So I've explained that, a number of ways in which I think blockchain could transform financial services. By the way, financial services is one of a dozen industries that is undergoing profound disruption because of this technology. Everything from supply chains to media, to government services, to the Internet of Things and utilities is up for grabs. But we only had 30 minutes, so I focused on the area where the rubber's really hitting the road. But there are also lots of reasons why this technology might not reach its potential. Is it ready for prime time? I.e., is the technology able to scale to meet the demands we're putting on it? Big question. Are regulators going to treat this as something that should be welcomed, or is it something that is hostile? We don't know yet. The results so far have been mixed. Will leaders of the old paradigm try and crush it or kill it? Banks have a lot to lose from this technology, as do other companies. Perhaps they will work to ensure it does not succeed. Could this be a job killer? In the end, if businesses are disrupted, that can mean people are out of work. All of these things are things we should be taking very seriously. But we have to ask ourselves, are they reasons that it's a bad idea that we shouldn't pursue this technology or any other for that matter? Or are they implementation challenges? Meaning, are they challenges that are meaningful but should be overcome? And the reason we should overcome them is because there's an opportunity to do something good. As I said, legacy opinions of blockchain and crypto assets are mixed. Some people are not big fans. We've seen examples of this throughout history, people questioning the validity or the importance of everything from the computer to the radio to the internet to the automobile to the television to democracy itself. And oftentimes, leaders of the old paradigm react to the new with hostility, and sometimes they try to fight against change. But the change is going to come. The genie is out of the bottle, as they say. So, a couple things. I would encourage you to check out my new book, Financial Services Revolution. It's available on Amazon. The book has a 5 out of 5 rating. People love it. It's chock full of research that we do at the Blockchain Research Institute, which is the largest independent blockchain think tank in the world, co-founded by me and my co-author, Don Tapscott. And I would also strongly encourage you, if you'd like to learn more about the impact of blockchain, not only on financial services, but on the enterprise and on business as a whole, to check out our course on the Coursera platform. This is a special exclusive partnership with INSEAD, which is the #1 business school in Europe, some would say the world. And it is a full, immersive, and deep, comprehensive class that allows you to become an expert on blockchain and the enterprise and blockchain and financial services. It is the #1 blockchain course on the Coursera platform. It has an average rating of 4.8 out of 5. The feedback has been terrific, so I strongly encourage you to check it out. And that concludes my speech. If you'd like to learn more about the Blockchain Research Institute, please check it out, blockchainresearchinstitute.org. You can see some of the things that we've done that are free for everyone and some of the things available for members. I'm looking now finally at the chat, and it seems as if I've run out of time. So thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. Like I said, stay safe. And remember, leadership is your personal opportunity. I think the last speaker said that. We're at the beginning of a big change in the way that we do things in the world. And there's a land grab, and everyone can be a part of it. So I encourage you to stake your claim. Thanks for joining me, and have a great day. Take care.